Are you ready to select a residential contractor for your remodel project or custom construction? Have you been presented with a contract to review and sign? Well, before you go any further and before you sign anything, contact Douglass Schwed at Access Law NW for an expert contract review and a contractor due diligence investigation. We highly recommend that before you sign any major home improvement, remodel, or custom construction contract, that you consult with a qualified real estate contract attorney. Mr. Schwed has developed a proprietary 10-step builder due diligence investigation algorithm, which fully and completely documents any contractor's operating and legal compliance history, including litigation checks, including civil and criminal background, bankruptcy filings, licensing compliance, insurance and bonding compliance, and other relevant business details. From that investigation, a written report is provided highlighting all areas of concern so the client can make a fully informed, unemotional business decision before the sign and before performance problems and disputes arise. Go to accesslawnw.com to contact us or to get more information. That's accesslawnw.com.
Seattle, Tacoma, Antwerp? That's right. We're streamed worldwide on our app and on the web at 1150kknw.com.
Welcome back to Real Talk with Brian and Dan on 1150 KKNW. I'm Brian.
And I'm Dan.
Our next guest is Douglass Schwed with Access Law Northwest, PLCC. Doug has been practicing law in Washington since 1981. For nearly 40 years, he has been servicing the real estate and business legal needs of his Puget Sound clients. Doug's practice specializes in contracts, real estate and business law, fraudulent conveyances, and legal investigations. Doug, tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, thanks, Dan. As I said, I'm a practicing attorney for nearly 40 years, and I've done all kinds of different things. But primarily I focus on dealing with consumers, dealing with contracts and business opportunities that might present itself. And I have a new area that I'm focusing on, and that's fraudulent investigations and real estate due diligence.
What do you do when you're not working? What are your hobbies and interests?
I like to build furniture, believe it or not, and I have a pretty extensive wood shop. My son's a contractor, and we work together on some different things, and it's been really rewarding. I've got all my fingers.
That's not very common for woodworkers, is it?
No, it can be. You got to keep your eye on the ball. That's for
Absolutely.
sure.
Yeah.
So where do you get your wood?
I get it different places. Second use. I get some stuff downtown. I know a couple of guys that when they're tearing down, clearing lots, I can get some bigger pieces. And
I've got a sawmill. It's called Four Finger Mill. And no, I'm kidding.
I'll be up to see it soon. I'm sure.
No, but we get some pretty interesting stuff out of there.
Yeah,
a lot of urban timber.
And I'm trying to just work a little more wood and metal together, which I think is an exciting media.
Yeah.
So this is a show about real estate, and even though this is going to be talking about you and your law stuff. Go back to your childhood. Doug's a young guy here, so what's some fond memories you have of the home you grew up in?
Well, I grew up in kind of rural Colorado, and we our family had mines, and they had cattle ranches. So I was always, running around playing in the mines, and lots of snow and skiing, and we had a nice, a big place and 5 acres, and we had an outdoor skating rink and that kind of stuff.
Oh, wow.
So it was a very outdoorsy kind of a situation. Yeah. Lots of animals, horses, dogs. Yeah.
All right. So getting into the business of legal disputes, what's the number one area of the disputes you've encountered?
Well, I think now that what I'm seeing, Dan, is because of the rising housing prices and the values, that people are staying in their homes longer, and therefore they're remodeling their homes rather than selling and buying a new one. And I'm seeing a lot of issues with contracts and with remodel contractors, frankly.
Yeah, the interesting thing, I wish I had the statistic, but I believe that there were some record numbers over the last year of people pouring into remodeling.
I've heard that.
I remember that, yeah.
So what can a consumer do to help prevent issues with residential contractors?
Well, the one thing they can do, and it's a free thing, is to just check them out. Get some references, ask for references, and check those references. I mean, that's looking on the internet. It's pretty transparent now, and you can, if you do some due diligence, you can find out, exactly what kind of work they've done, if the customers have been satisfied, what their areas of expertise are, and also if there's been some disappointment along the way.
Right. I think you can look up their business license pretty easily,
Their
right?
contractor's license.
Contractors.
Yeah, L&I.
Right.
Yeah. See if they've got a active license and bond.
Yeah,
Right.
that brings me to my question. What are the requirements to become a residential contractor in Washington State?
Well, surprisingly, the thing that shocks a lot of people is that there's no requirement for any experience.
You're
Really?
kidding.
No. You have to have experience and pass a test to be an electrical contractor and a plumbing contractor. However, to be a general contractor, all you need to do is have a business license, post a $250,000 insurance policy for general liability, and have a $12,000 bond.
Well, and I think it's important to explain that a general contractor isn't always doing the work. They're maybe just
They're
coordinating
managing
the work,
the job.
right?
And it's similar for subs, Dan. Like I said, the two exceptions that do require some tenure and experience are the plumbing and electric trades. But most of the subcontractors, if they are licensed, the only requirement they have is a $6,000 bond.
So along that line would be drywall, painting, floor refinishing, windows, that kind of thing?
Correct.
None of them have to prove any ability or skill before getting a contractor's license.
Yeah, that's correct. I just had a case I just finished up settling, and it turned out that the contractor was using day laborers he found up at Home Depot to do some of the work. I mean,
Wow.
it was egregious.
So by the time you get involved, that transaction's gone south. What are the most common things you're seeing? What are the problems that are arising?
Well, I think there's two sets of problems. One set is the contract itself. And I can touch on some of the things that we find that are missing. And I guess I want to emphasize one thing to do initially is when you get ready to enter into one of these contracts, have a qualified lawyer look at this deal, because we're finding there's job descriptions are incomplete. There's no performance payment ties. There's oftentimes no understanding about who's pulling the permits on the deal.
Mm-hmm.
There's no penalties for missed completion dates.
I think the interesting part about that is when everything's hunky-dory, when you're happy and you've got them coming over and doing it, that's, nobody thinks about the details that could go wrong. It's when things go wrong that you're like, well, what did we agree upon?
That's correct. And so, if we get into that situation and the contract doesn't have some of these key provisions, like an attorney's fees clause, for instance, the state of Washington, you can only obtain attorney's fees in litigation if it's either provided for by contract or by statute. So that being said, the contracts are very important to have. It's important to have a contract rather to have a attorney's fees provision, which incentivizes an attorney to go after a contractor. We also the other big problem we see are change orders and having a clear definition of what is a change order, having mutual acceptance on a change order. And just a detailed bid that outlines all the costs, including specifications, manufacturer specifications, and making it clear exactly what the customer wants to have installed in their house.
So, Doug, if somebody was to say, hey, listen, I want to hire these people, they're not giving me a contract, can they just draft one themselves and template like a standardized kind of thing?
That's a good question, too. 75% of the contracts I see never include a provision that ties the payment to completion, for example. 50% of those don't include any termination clause if the builder doesn't perform.
Yeah.
And 25% of the contractors out there don't use written contracts, which in the state of Washington really creates a problem because those are basically unenforceable.
So that means that the recipient of the work could it's not enforced if they tried to collect on it or place a lien on the property?
Correct.
Is there a statute provision for attorney's fees in Washington?
I'm sorry?
A statute provision for attorney's fees?
There's no statutory provision.
So it's got to be in the contract.
It's got to be in the contract, correct.
Wow.
Now, there would be, in the case if you can prove a consumer protection violation, which is a pattern of behavior. In other words, the contractor is so egregious that he's done it to other people. You could possibly dovetail an attorney's fees claim under that provision, but that's a difficult argument to make sometimes.
Well, occasionally I run into mechanics liens on properties from previous work. You get involved in that, and if you tell us a little bit about liens, please.
Sure, I sure do, Dan. Dan.
Brian.
Brian. I'm Brian.
I'm Dan.
I'm Doug.
It's okay. We're all good.
Liens are a statutory way. They're provided by statute. They're very specific. One of the things that the consumer needs to know, in order for a contractor to even file a lien, has to be licensed. So if you're not licensed, you don't file a lien. Can't perfect your interest that way. And the liens have to be filed within 90 days of the cessation of work or delivery of materials to the site. So it's important to know when there's a dispute going on, when was the last time materials were delivered or the builder was at the site. And they have to file that lien within that statutory period of time. And they also have to file a litigation after that within 9 months of the time they file their lien.
So, because residential contracts are not uniform, what, in your experience, are some of the important provisions you find to be deficient or missing entirely?
Those would include such things as, like I mentioned earlier, a termination clause. It's very important that the contracts spell out the reasons why the homeowner or the contractor can terminate the deal. Back to liens for a second, the contract should also provide and require, and state law requires that the consumer be given a notice of consumer rights related to liens, which explains to the consumer, the homeowner, what in fact a lien is. It can be attached to your home. You can actually get foreclosed out on your property. And that's something that the consumer needs to sign, and the builder needs to keep in his office the hard copy for 1 year. So there's no debate about that. And if in fact that is not done, then the lien rights could be voided.
Right.
I talked about a little bit about the one other area we see that needs addressing often in a complex deal would be what happens if there's some mechanism for the architect and the builder to resolve things. In other words, if the architectural plans show it one way and the builder determines it can't be built that way, how is that problem resolved?
And who's responsible for it?
Right.
Yeah.
And how who's got the authority to say what and do what? So those on bigger deals, that's important. If there's we talked about the attorney fees clause. We've talked about the cost, detailed costs and a budget and a clean bid.
So just to recap, when it comes to getting work done in your house, if you hire somebody to come out to do it, and you have a verbal contract, and there's none of these things outlined, then really the contractor's kind of putting themselves in a bad spot more than the consumer.
Well, I think it's equally bad for both.
Yeah.
And I think the builder certainly has put himself at risk because he's got no mechanism to enforce payment if he doesn't get paid along the way.
Right.
And similarly, the consumer has no recourse against the builder for poor or shoddy work.
Right. And Brian, you and I both know in this business right now, not only just doing remodels to your house, but getting a home ready for sale, right? Tradesmen are men and women, tradesmen and women are hard to come by to show up, do a timely delivery of work. And so corners could be cut. And that liability falls to the seller if something comes up during that transfer, right?
Right.
So I would say it would be really awesome, Doug, that if you can somehow provide that template, because I will say this as somebody who has experienced this in the short term, is I don't have any mechanism to hand a contractor, say, hey, let's outline this that has all these provisions. Let's fill in the scope of work, and we both agree to it. That would alleviate liability if you did that in advance, and then you can move forward rather than relying on a contractor who may not realize that they're leaving themselves open. They're just trying to do their work, because typically I don't know, I'm using a very broad brush when I say that, but Many are just working. They're just out there
Right.
doing things. They're not thinking business-minded and, attorney-minded.
So that goes to my next question, which is how do people actually implement your service, to do the review? At what point should they reach out to you?
They should reach out, Brian, when at the time they've decided or what they think they've made a decision on the contractor, but before they've signed any agreement.
Mm-hmm.
So when they've been presented a bid and a contract from the builder, that's the time to get in touch with us. And we'll go through it. We'll review it. We'll also do a 10-step due diligence review of that builder, which includes a litigation review, does all the due diligence for the state and records and insurance and compliance and so forth. But it goes deeper. We look at past litigation. They might be involved in any complaints that have gone to litigation, bankruptcies, liens, judgments, foreclosures that may be affecting the viability of that business.
Now, how much does it cost to review and due diligence? How much does that cost?
Our 10-point due diligence, which gives you a written report, is $250.
It seems like it would save a lot of money.
Seems like a bargain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is a bargain. It's 2 or 3 day turnaround. So at the point where the consumer gets the contract, like I said, from the builder, then that's the time to shoot it to me, and I'll take a look at it. And
Doug, if an individual has maybe a handful of contractors they're working with, like let's say they're looking for a specific job, so they've got 3 people that they've bid, would you bundle that together in one, or is it $250 for each one?
Well, we could look at if they've been presented 3 contracts, and that would be 3 contract reviews, and then it would be 3 due diligence reviews as well.
So typically they choose one and submit that to you.
Right, that's typically what they've done. They feel they can work with this guy, and at that point, but do it before you sign.
Yeah. This stuff's good to know.
Yeah.
How do our listeners reach you?
The easiest way is either call the office, 425-495-1277. We're here in Bellevue, or shoot me an email.
What's your email address?
It's Doug, D-O-U-G, at accesslawnw.com.
Sounds
Awesome.
good. Doug, thank you so much for coming in today. You're listening to Real Talk with Brian and Dan at 1150 KKNW. After the break, we have some more Real Talk and, of course, some great